Remember when the FDA said cheeseburgers were contributing to global warming? Our next guest always disagreed with that. The FDA apparently is listening. They've taken cheeseburgers off the warning list. Jason Lusk is here. By the way, he is the author of the book, Unnaturally Delicious. All right, Jason, you've got to win on this one, haven't you? I mean, you said there's nothing wrong with cheeseburgers. You're not causing climate change, and you won. Well done.
Well, I don't want to say they don't have any impact on the environment. They have a small impact, but, I think when you look at the evidence, we're talking about very small changes. And indeed, the USDA and the Department of Health and Human Services, they came out and said they're going to remove sustainability as a criteria when they're releasing their new nutritional guidelines.
Really, what they were talking about was cow flatulence. Cows which produce beef, of course, they do their thing out in the field, and that was contributing to global warming. That was the FDA's problem. I think that's what they were talking about at first, wasn't it?
Well, initially these dietary guidelines, when they came out, they said they wanted to consider sustainability issues. But really, when you look at the report, it often just boiled down to greenhouse gas emissions. But of course, sustainability is a bit of a nebulous term, and it involves a lot of different issues. And when you read that report, actually one of the things they really focus on is resource use. And to an economist's ears, when I hear about resource use, I think about the price mechanism.
Right.
When I think about allocating, allocating resources, I think one of the most efficient ways to do that is to use the price mechanism to tell us what things are more or less expensive, to tell us what resources to cut back on. And when I see these kind of reports that are sort of giving a top-down suggestion on how we should spend our resources, that gives me pause.
What would you do? I mean, if you were in charge of, I don't know, what kind of policy, what would you do? I mean, let's suppose you were in charge of climate change policy. You had to tell the people, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. What would you do?
Well, I think one of the things we want to do is to let that price mechanism that I referred to do its work. And indeed, if you look at the price of meat, it is more expensive generally than other foodstuffs, and that's telling us that it is using a lot of resources. Now, one thing we might want to think about doing is that sometimes prices don't reflect all the costs that are involved, so maybe they don't reflect the price of carbon or water use. So we might want to make sure that resources are properly priced, that maybe even sometimes that we think about creative ways of making sure that these so-called externalities get priced into the market. But generally, I'd let people make their own decisions given those prices.
Does the government have a role in saying this element should be included in the real price of this?
Well, I think, what you want to do, I think, in those cases is make sure that we have property rights well defined. So let's take an example like water, for example. Some people argue, well, the price of beef doesn't properly include the price of water. Well, the issue there is that water isn't very well traded because people aren't given rights over what they own and are allowed to trade those in ways that the prices can reflect that scarcity. So I think one of the things you can do is make sure that ownership rights are well defined, that property rights are well defined, and that we have a legal system that can sort out those challenges when they happen. And I do think it is a proper role for government to tell us what I think the best science has to say on such issues. I think providing information, as long as it's unbiased, is a legitimate role for the government as well.
Fair point. Jason Lusk, you won on cow flatulence. Well done, young man. Well done. Jason, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate that.
Thanks for having me on again, Stuart.